Chris, I'm Alan Guarino, Vice Chairman of Korn Ferry, and joined the firm 2007 and started the global fintech practice with another colleague. And what we do is, in a nutshell, we optimize talent. And sometimes optimizing talent is recruiting, and sometimes optimizing talent is coaching, and sometimes optimizing talent is helping to design a new org structure. So we're the biggest company in the world in what we do. We've got about 11,000 people around the world. And recruiting is a big part of what we do, but we really help leaders grow their businesses through people.
So obviously you get kind of first view of needs and briefs from employers. What are the biggest skill gaps that businesses are trying to fill right now?
Let's think about it this way. Let's think about some very interesting players that are not in financial services, and I'll give you the contrast. So think about a company like John Deere, which used to be known as a company that built tractors, and now basically it's an Internet of Things company that runs machinery through massive use and deployment of data. And then you think about Lego, which used to be a toy company, right, which is now all about augmented reality and various other things like robotics. Okay, so the skill sets that those companies are consuming is the kind of skill set that financial services wants to start consuming and lacks today. So the full stack software engineer, for example, right, front, middle, and back, as well as infrastructure, all seen as, you know, one sort of monolith. As opposed to the way financial services might have handled this years ago, which was much more siloed, right? So it's quite a difference in terms of the talent need versus what they've deployed historically.
So you've been in this game for a while now, and obviously you just talked a little bit about trends you're seeing right now. If you zoom out a little bit, what have been the big changes since you got into this game?
Oh, well, you know, financial services has been exciting, especially fintech, because fintech has been seen as disruptive. So I can go all the way back to the late 90s when electronification of equities was something that started. And the notion was, well, we don't need people to trade stocks. We can trade stocks through an electronic matching engine. And through innovative fintechs, that became disruptive, and it completely changed the way today securities are traded in terms of stocks and certainly even some fixed income instruments. So that, to me, was sort of 1.0. And I've seen this evolve over the last 20 plus years to 2.0, 3.0, and so on. So let's think about the electronification of equities. And then we got into the market structure changes that occurred as a result of that. So now you had fragmentation where you were able to trade in multiple venues. It wasn't any longer there was an exchange where you had to go to trade. So that now, the electronics were in place, but now that the way the businesses operated started to change, right? That required smart decisions and ultimately new businesses. And now here we are with digital assets, right? The idea of tokenization, additionally cryptocurrency, another conversation. So I've absolutely seen it. And by the way, the types of people that were being hired in the 90s and early 2000s by financial services institutions in capital markets was very different than those fintechs that were competing with them and hiring during that same time frame. Make sense?
In what differences? Who were they looking for at that time?
Well, the fintechs were shifting towards technologists and for the front office type of work, right? Because the front office was becoming the machine, so to speak. And the legacy financial services firms were still looking at traditional traders. So there was this concept at the time where the traders were saying this too will pass. Guess what? There's probably 95% less traders today per securities trade than there was 20 years ago.
So obviously you see the briefs from the employers and you also see the people that get the roles. Is there a mismatch or any discrepancy between who they think they want to hire and who they end up hiring, and therefore you have been part of shaping that profile as the appointment is made later on?
Interesting question. So I'll take you back a little bit to history, but we were meeting several years ago with a company that was in the business of being a securities exchange. And I went around with a partner of mine and polled each board member, and they were fairly traditional, let's say last generation, typically in the boardroom, in a very high-speed evolving industry. And we said, where's your next CEO going to come from? And we went around the room, and you can imagine, we heard Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. Those are the likely places. And when we finished, I looked at the board and said, I'm surprised none of you said Microsoft. Half the board started laughing. The other half went, wow, yeah, that makes some sense, right? So that's where we always are when transformations are happening, right? We have this inertia that lets us think that things are going to stay relatively the same. And then we have people that are kind of looking around the corners. The old Gretzky adage, right? Go where the puck is going, not where the puck is, right? So in that regard, the talent that's being called for today is much more of a tech skill set versus, let's say, an understanding of core financial services. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. And would you say that different parts of financial institutions are more or less receptive to importing tech talent, or I'm thinking about governance and risk and compliance.
Sure.
Like, do you see a nuance within a financial services business?
Sure. Governance, risk, compliance, trying to, let's say, conceivably look towards non-financial services companies, but without the same level of intensity as other areas. And when they do look there, they're smart, and they say, well, let's look at telecommunications. It's a regulated industry, so it's not that far of a reach if we're going to go outside of financial services for things like risk and governance, and finance, by the way. The surprising area, I think, that folks would find interesting is that the high demand is actually in sales and client relationship management. Banks have realized that tech companies for the last 15 or 20 years have developed very intense sales methodologies. And you think about the last day of the quarter in a tech company, I don't think anybody sleeps, right? That level of intensity around revenue recognition, revenue capture, deal closing, right? And even the notion of how they manage a pursuit of a long selling cycle sale. By the way, large financial institutions that are selling institutional products, those are long selling cycle transactions. If you're selling custody, asset servicing, various other things to other major institutions, they don't make those decisions lightly. They don't switch overnight. So there's a real analogy between the sales paradigm of selling institutional services as a bank and tech companies selling major software solutions, right? So they're importing people from the tech world and they're putting them out front, and they're teaching the bank salespeople and relationship management people this new way of going after the go-to-market.
One thing that always comes up in conversations these days is around Gen AI. Have you seen that filtering through to job descriptions? Is that something that's shaping people's search criteria or briefs and new roles potentially being created? What's your take on Gen AI and how it's being recruited for or supported by new talent?
So, a couple questions there. Let's talk about roles. Maybe we'll work backwards. So start macro. New jobs. Chief AI officer, clearly, right? And that person has to figure out what AI is going to do to eat that company's lunch as their competitors may be deploying it, and therefore what they need to do to make sure that they win, right? So that chief AI officer, very interesting. It's going to happen. It's already happening in a couple of our clients. And that, by the way, that job will evolve as well, right? First of all, it's make sure we don't get beat, figure out what we don't know, right? And eventually it will be, now that we know what we know, how do we deploy it, right? The partner job to that is the chief data officer, right? And today, chief data officers exist largely to have some rationality around the data that companies buy. And so these folks are more product-wise around data. The chief data officer of the future in an AI world is going to be a very technically qualified data person, right? And they're going to be working hand in hand with product people because the product is fueled by the data. And so the better the data, the better the product can actually be created and executed on. So again, silos are going to break down in that regard.
Tangential to that, I suppose, how do you think traditional leadership skills are being valued versus technical skills? Are they at par with each other now, or is one winning over the other depending on the role?
Sure. Just left a meeting an hour ago. We talked about what chief information officers look for, and I've seen it begin as people who could write code were the people who became the chief information officer 20-some odd years ago. Made sense, right? Then it became, wow, these technology organizations are so big, They're so mission critical, and they're so less about, in the old days, it was literally called data processing, if you can think way back, even before my time, to the point where they said, we can hire programmers, and programmers can be led by engineers that run various silos. The chief information officer is actually running a very complicated enterprise. And so maybe they don't have to have ever written code a day in their life, but they're great leaders, managers, decision makers, and so on. So that's what happened, and that flipped. And for the last pick a time frame, 15 years, CIOs were less likely to just absolutely have come up through the software or code writing world, right? Well, the conversation I had today is, boy, isn't it interesting when a scary percentage for those of us that are sort of like see AI as a significant, worldwide transformation when it comes to all kinds of things. If half the jobs potentially that are filled by people today are filled by machines that have been taught by people, then we speculate that the leader of that organization is going to have to be, again, more tech-centric. So it's almost like Back to the Future. In the beginning, they were former code writers, developers, programmers. Then it became enterprise leaders of significant scale, 20, 30, 50, 100,000 people in a Fortune 500 tech company, right? Or Fortune 500 tech organization, right? Well, now, maybe it's 25% of that previous headcount in the future. And that leader is going to have to be a technocrat.
So thinking about the candidates' point of view or their perspective, who do you think will be the most successful? What kind of profile is bound to be the most successful within a traditional regulated financial services institution? You talked a little bit about this earlier. You mentioned Microsoft as an example. Will they do well at a bank, or how should the candidates think about acclimatizing to their new industry potentially if they're transitioning?
Actually, it's just as much, if not more, the company's responsibility, Chris. Right? I need to set those people up to win, and I need to understand that I'm bringing in a different type of DNA. And so I've really got to do culture work, because I can't expect that person to bend to the point of breaking when they're wired a different way. Again, similar meeting I had with a similar audience to the one I was just describing around a technology leader, and we're talking about the fact that we want these edgy, full stack tech engineers, but we also know that there's a high probability of flame out and organ rejection, because from a stylistic standpoint, they are just different. And so as a result, it is a real challenge for the human capital side of the organization to figure out how to get the skills and talent that they need coming from an edgier type of a culture and bringing them in and having them land and having them integrate and having them succeed. So now going back to the person, kind of goes back to the organization again, where if I'm going to hire these technologists, maybe I need to use some psychometrics that can let me understand their competencies, traits, and drivers, so that while they are these edgy technologists, if we can stereotype, they may have higher EQ. They may have higher learning agility. They may be more patient, right? So while they have a tendency to potentially become organ rejected, they've also got the soft skills that might allow them to do what you're talking about, take a bit of it on themselves to say, how do I fit in here?
Is there anything we haven't touched on that you think is particularly relevant to discuss when one is thinking about recruitment and talent in the world of FIs today? Anything you're seeing, any trends, anything you're thinking or talking about with clients or even internally?
Great question. And financial services is a tough place to play, because the stakes are high, the compensation tends to be higher than other industries, and believe me, not that any other industries are easy, but because of pace, complexity, globalization today, work is a professional playing field as opposed to a Division II sport that it might have been 15 years ago. So as a result, for people to succeed in their career, in any industry, I think they have to focus on this thing I call the greatness code. So basically, persistence, resilience, passion, stamina, courage. Those 5 things, if you build those muscles, early career, mid-career, peak career, and deploy them differently at each stage, you'll be able to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And everyone has certain personal objectives for achievement. But those will only get you this far. this other thing, and I think it's going to become more and more dominant as we have AI, is this thing called social capital. And so it's the people that are around you, the mentors, the people who set you straight, the people who you can aspire to follow. That human sort of leverage that will be more than those personal qualities alone. Those two together allow you to get here. And so I would just encourage people to do two things. Work on those muscles, passion, resilience, persistence, stamina, courage. And although they may not like it, build that network of people that are going to give you leverage. And that's a two-way street. It's kind of like there's an old saying, in order to have a friend, you need to be a friend. So it's not about going out and finding people that you can take advantage of who will help you. It's building a network around you that is collaborative, some senior, some peers, some junior, but they're all basically part of the fuel that drives your career.
Alan, fascinating insight. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate that.
Great.